Project Day 2. I just got my first look at artifact H349. It's heavier than expected. More than a few people question if we should study something with such a dire legacy, but if we can't understand our enemy's tools, then we leave ourselves vulnerable to them. Project Day 5 ran our first test of the artifact's, let's call them, necrotic properties. We used cattle. They were large enough to survive the initial discharge. The results have been upsetting. No more animal testing. Project Day 30. Spectral analysis is back, and it's got nothing. The artifact doesn't operate like traditional hive tech, which is our closest analog. A cult of deranged fanatics can mass-produce knockoffs, but we can't even tell you what it's made from. Project Day 31. We had an accidental discharge. Caro, lab tech over in 4B. Human, so this is going to be it for him. We've got someone staying with him as the corruption spreads. At the very least, there's so much more to study now as we watch his unfortunate deterioration. He's been babbling since it hit his central nervous system, saying, "I'm reborn," or variations thereof. I think he almost sounds happy. Project Day 39. The Vanguard forbade a post-mortem, but a few of us couldn't stomach the idea of Caro's sacrifice being in vain. The results have been insightful. Off the record, I'm keeping a few tissue samples. It almost feels like having him around again. Project Day 41. We began the day with another moment of silence for our lost colleague. Too bad he's not around to appreciate it. Project Day 45. We kept thinking about H349 as a destroyer, but it's more sophisticated than that. I mean, with a normal gun, it's just boom, done. H349, on the other hand, is deadly, not destructive. Much like a viper, its bite does not bring about instant death. Instead, its venom cajoles. It co-opts your beating heart into a death clock, ticking down your last moments. Your own pulse kills you. Death may be slow and agonizing for its victim, but for the viper, time is an amenable trade for efficiency. Project Day 51. Yanav has been crying a lot lately. We must accept that tragedies happen. It's a hard lesson to learn. Project Day 65. Another accidental discharge today. We realized that yours little creation is hungry, so we fed it more. It certainly performs in exchange. The activity is intriguing after it feasts. I've been able to follow Yanav's degradation with a more analytical mind than when we lost Caro. I have to say, the process is so elegant. The science involved almost seems poetic. It may be reproducible. Just imagine how much more I could have learned if the scanners were all active at the time. Project Day 77. Another accidental discharge. This time, I ensured the scanners were running beforehand. Audio logs of Warlock and researcher Jana 14, salvaged after evacuation. Stasis was a game changer for me in that it caused me to switch from a grenade-based Void build to a melee-based Stasis build. This became especially true when I acquired the Necrotic Grip Gauntlets, which pairs nicely with my Trench Barrel Perfect Paradox shotgun. The Perfect Paradox has corkscrew rifling, tactical mag, demolitionist, which grants me grenade energy with kills, and Trench Barrel, a perk that I'm very used to using in raids. Meleeing an enemy causes a temporary damage buff, a few seconds long. The intrinsic trait is a rapid fire frame. It fires full auto with deep ammo reserves. Faster reload when weapon is empty. We'll talk a little bit more about this reload later. The other weapon that I've continued using since last season when I first got the curated role last spring of 2020, is the Gnawing Hunger. I managed to grab another one of these curated roles from the Tier 3 Reckoning before yearly reset. Therefore, this has a 1360 power cap instead of a 1060 power cap. This weapon has arrowhead break, appended mag, overflow, and rampage. I find that it's incredibly useful in both PvE and PvP. This is a well-rounded weapon. And because of the number of kills that you can secure, I chose to add a rampage spec to it, which increases the duration of rampage. The intrinsic trait is the adaptive frame, a well-rounded grip, reliable, and sturdy. Finally, my heavy weapon is the Anarchy, which I earned from the Scourge of the Past raid. This is by far my favorite heavy weapon, although it's rivaled closely by 1000 Voices from the Last Wish raid, which I do use in certain situations. Anarchy has quick launch, high velocity rounds, moving target, and composite stock. The intrinsic trait is arc traps. Grenades stick to surfaces and chain arc bolts to other mines. This is excellent because it's a low risk, high reward weapon. If I'm in a situation where a boss can freeze me, I can peek around a corner, shoot off 2 Anarchy shots against that boss, and then get back into safety. Low risk, high reward. As I stated before, this build is centered around the Necrotic Grip gauntlets. This is the new exotic armor. To gain power, you must sacrifice. Exos have known this long before the Guardians rise. Takeo 3. The armor perk is the Grasp of the Devourer. Damaging combatants with melee attacks corrupts them with increasing damage over time. Defeating a corrupted combatant spreads the corrupting energy to nearby targets and restores melee energy. As I stated earlier, the reload was a bit of an issue for me with the Perfect Paradox, and after playing around with this build for a little bit, I realized I absolutely had to add reloaders for this weapon. So I added 2 shotgun loaders, which made a huge difference considering how much I use this shotgun in this build. When I first started this build, it began as a Warmind build, and it eventually evolved into a pure Charged with Light build that revolves around ability regeneration. The first step with a Charged with Light build is to make sure that you are getting stacks of Charged with Light. The green mods give you stacks. The yellow mods use stacks. The first challenge I had with this build is I wanted to start off with Reactive Pulse. Reactive Pulse is an incredible mod that is great for ad clearing. Anything that comes after you once you're surrounded, or as I found, even if there's a group of enemies in front of you, Reactive Pulse will go off and defeat them. Unfortunately, you don't really have any control over when this is done, especially when using a shotgun build. You're getting right in there, this thing is going to go off all the time, and it's going to always use your stacks of light. The other mod I was really interested in using was Protective Light. This is one that is highly revered by the community. While charged with light, you gain significant damage resistance against combatants when your shields are destroyed. This effect consumes all stacks of Charged with Light. The more stacks consumed, the longer the damage resistance lasts. This was the absolute worst mod for me when it came to keeping a stockpile of Charged with Light stacks. I never had Charged with Light for my melee ability. And I really wanted to keep that melee ability charged. Why? Because when using heavy-handed, while charged with light, you regain half of your melee energy when you use a charged melee ability, consuming 1 stack, only 1 stack, of charged with light. Given how powerful the Stasis melee is, I decided to go with heavy-handed over Protective Light. And my struggle was to find another damage mod that would complement this mod without using up all of the other Charged with Light stacks. Another thing to note with this mod, if you look down in the very light blue shaded out text, it says while surrounded by multiple combatants, defeating a combatant with a fusion rifle, shotgun, sidearm, or SMG adds ammo for that weapon to your reserves. I have 100% noticed with the Perfect Paradox that ammo has not been an issue. Once in a while I'll run out, but I get it back right away. Given that Trench Barrel on the Perfect Paradox requires you to melee an enemy in order to get that added damage bonus, it really goes hand in hand with heavy-handed. That gives you half of your melee energy back when you use a charged melee ability. Note that this mod doesn't require you to get a kill. So if you go up to a boss and melee it with a charged melee ability, because of the heavy-handed mod, you get 50% of your melee charge back. And with the Perfect Paradox, you get increased damage for a few seconds. Looking for a complementary mod was a challenge, and I decided to go with Solar Leg Armor so I could use the Firepower mod. While charged with light, regain a portion of your grenade energy when you use your grenade, consuming only 1 stack of charged light. There we have it, folks. We have 2 damage mods, the melee mod and this grenade mod, which each use only 1 stack of light when you choose to use these abilities. Therefore, they never really compete with each other for stacks of light. You should always have a supply of stacks of light for your abilities. Both of these give you ability charges, which is exactly what I was going for with this build. I had 4 energy slots available, so I decided to favor mods that would help with ability regeneration. I went with recuperation, which replenishes health each time you pick up an orb of power, and absolution, which reduces all ability cooldowns each time you pick up an orb of power. So how exactly do we get charged with light? Well, the green mods will give you a stack of charge with light. Taking charge is probably the most popular charge with light mod for gaining stacks. You become charged with light by picking up orbs of power. My suggestion is to always run masterworked weapons, so you're constantly getting orbs with, I'd say, with about every other enemy defeated. Also, if you're running with a fire team, you're probably going to want to give preference to people who also run with masterworked weapons and who have ability builds that allow them to use their supers often. So you're getting orbs off of those as well. The other mod that I've been using, especially since I've been using a shotgun and melee build, so I'm up close to all the enemies, is Empowered Finish. This Charge with Light mod allows you to become charged with light by finishing a combatant, consuming 1/10 of your super energy. So this isn't something I want to use all the time, but Empowered Finish, look, you're going to be using finishing moves, especially against stronger enemies who are really annoying, such as barrier champions. Do you really want to take the last few seconds to try to completely defeat that enemy with firepower at the risk that its barrier will come up, or would you rather use a finisher on it? On my Solar Bond, I went with Supercharged. You can have 2 additional stacks of Charge with Light up to a maximum of 5. With this particular build, I get a max of 4 stacks of Charge with Light, which is perfect. It works out perfectly for me. I almost always have stacks available. Worth noting, this is a Stasis ability build, so this is where the Warlock Bond really comes into play. If you're into ability builds, I highly recommend using a Solar Bond on the Warlock. In the past, I've always had a combination of Enhanced Bomber and Enhanced Ashes to Assets. The Enhanced mods have since been removed by Bungie and replaced with just regular mods that actually give you way more power back. Ashes to Assets has been moved to the helmet from the Bond. Therefore, I chose to use both slots for the Bomber mod. This gives me back about 50% of my grenade energy when I put down a Warlock Rift. On the helmet, I went with the Ashes to Assets mod so that it gives me bonus super energy with every grenade kill. Since I'm using Anarchy as my heavy weapon, I chose to go with the grenade launcher ammo finder to ensure that I'm always getting heavy drops. The gauntlets were completed with the double shotgun loader and the Empowered Finish. Presently, ammo finders and reloaders are the mods that I care about most when it comes to weapons. You do have the option of using reserve mods or unflinching aim mods on the chest armor. And scavenger mods can be found in the leg armor. But before considering adding any of those other mods to my build, I like to look at the stats on the armor. Now, this distribution is pretty good. We don't really have any wasted stats. So quick note about how these work. Using strength as an example. The power of the ability has nothing to do with the last number. So the 3 here means nothing. The 5 means everything. I sometimes say that I have a 5 strength in this situation because it's putting me in the 5th tier. Everything in the 5th tier is equal. So a 53 is exactly the same as a 59. This 53 is also exactly the same as a 50. So one could technically say that we're wasting 3 points here. But what I did was I added a strength mod, a minor strength mod, which is new to Beyond Light, to this build. Without the minor strength mod, I have 48 strength. That means I have 8 wasted points. With only 2 more, that would put me into 5th tier. And since this is a melee build, having a 5th tier strength is not a bad idea. The other way to solve the problem of only a 2-point difference is to masterwork your gear, since a masterworked item gives you 2 additional points for each stat. However, everything in this build is already masterworked, so we can't go that route. So what I did is I chose to go to my bond and add a minor strength mod. I looked at my other mods, and the stat mods I chose to use really depended on how all the stats added up among these 5 specific armor pieces. Yours will be different depending on what you've gotten. While I do like to have my mobility in the 3rd tier or higher with the Warlock, this is absolutely not a priority for Warlock mains. This is where you can really sit on things and just kind of let it go. With 22 mobility, this Warlock is still perfectly fine and incredibly powerful. And for some reason, she's fast. Last season, just before Beyond Light dropped, I decided that I was going to use 7th tier resilience all the time. In Crucible, I discovered through experience that I could not be 2-shot with a Thorn if I had 7th tier. I also had the benefit of finding some videos on YouTube from other creators who did the math and found that 7th tier resilience was really the best option for Crucible if you wanted to avoid succumbing to the burn of Thorn or Le Monarch, and also resist some of the more powerful hand cannons out there. In Grandmaster Nightfalls, I discovered through my own experience that if I was 7th tier, I was less likely to get one-shot. In fact, I rarely ever got one-shot. Recovery is a top priority for most Warlock mains because it gives you a decreased ability cooldown. With the 7th tier, the Warlock Rift takes only 59 seconds to regenerate and has a recovery rate increase of 23%. Note at the bottom, it does tell you what the improvement is. You can get a significant improvement if you go up to tier 8. But honestly, my Rift really isn't an issue with this build. I never really have to worry about healing. I've always been a big fan of grenades, especially coming from a Voidlock. But given the mods that are available on the armor with Charge with Light as well as your bomber mods, Discipline isn't that high of a priority. 5th tier is perfectly fine, and we could even knock it down to 4th tier if we really needed to up our stats in another spot. 5th tier, perfectly fine. You probably won't even notice a difference if you're using the Charge with Light mods. Intellect is a highly desirable stat for Warlocks. We are all about our supers. My super ability cooldown here takes 4 minutes and 24 seconds. If I knocked it up to tier 8, it would be 4 minutes and 14 seconds. That's only a decrease of 10 seconds. Honestly, I don't think it's worth taking it up to tier 8. Your best bet is simply to do your job as a Warlock. Defeat enemies and use Ashes to Assets, which will feed you a lot of super energy with grenade kills. The final stat is Strength. Since this is a melee build, I wanted to make sure that I had higher strength for this Warlock. It is important to secure some kills in certain situations, but being as how the exotic gauntlets work and the trench barrel on Perfect Paradox works, securing the kill really isn't that big of a deal. But we do want to make sure we're decreasing that ability cooldown as much as possible. Again, this pairs with the Charge Light mod, Heavy Handed, which gives us back about 50% of our melee energy. And then we're looking at only about 38 seconds for our melee to fully charge. For the Shadebinder build, I decided to go with my usual Healing Rift and my usual Strafe Glide for greater directional control. I love this jump for platforming. It is precision jumping. In fact, it's the most precise jump in the game. I went with Penumbral Blast. Raise your stasis staff against your foe. Send a blast of stasis forward to freeze your targets. That is my melee. And the Duskfield Grenade. A grenade that shatters on impact, leaving behind a field that slows targets and freezes those who do not leave the volume. Now, the most interesting part of this build is the aspect, the Ice Flare Bolts. An unseeing yet all-knowing stare fixed eternally to a solitary point. You track your enemies with blade-like precision. Shattering a frozen target spawns seekers that track and freeze other nearby targets. The fragment I equipped is the Whisper of Durance. Slow from your abilities lasts longer. For those abilities that linger, their duration will also increase. I first heard it in the Thrall-carved tunnels on Callisto as I saw light torn from my friend. A chaotic chime like breaking glass, ringing in the corners of my mind. I ignored it then and burned the hive vermin with vengeance and fire. But it returned when Gaul's wicked contraption gripped the traveler and the light fled from my bones. A cold chorus in my ears. A shattered song demanding to be heard. I clung to it then, shivering in the rubble of the last city. It drowned out the marching of centurions and focused my will to survive. It was in the shadow of the pyramid on Europa that I finally understood. What was noise became a chilling harmony born of dissonance, a structure I could finally grasp. I joined the song, and as my voice perfected the chord, my hands gripped a staff of ice, chaos given shape. It sealed my hands in rhyme, and the song resonated through my flesh. I was its instrument, and it was mine. When we sang "Be Still" to the world, it would obey. I'm Dire. If you like this video, please like, share, and comment. Don't forget to click the subscribe button and the notification bell below to be notified when new videos are posted. You can also find me on Twitch, Discord, and other social media. Links are in the description below.